Welcome back, everybody, to Wavelengths. We have another very special guest. And if you are from the tri state area like I am, this man's face and voice you will know. He is Bill Pidto of the MSG Network. You have seen him talk about the Knicks, talk about the Rangers, the MSG 150. First off, thank you for this, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, Steve. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. So obviously, I've said on here a bunch of times. Okay, so I thought the Knicks in four. Looking back at it, Atlanta is a really good basketball team. So I maybe shouldn't have said that. But now that the season's done, unfortunately for the Knicks, it was ultimately a success, right?
Oh, no question. No one in the world, much less the country, saw 41-31 with a fourth overall finish in the East, with Julius Randle becoming an elite player, with RJ Barrett taking the steps that he took. No one saw it coming. I think it's a great foundational year for this team and this franchise. And Tom Thibodeau really showed that if there was any doubt, and I don't know that there was any doubt, he is an elite coach.
I'm glad you brought up RJ because that actually brings up something that I've gone back and forth on the entire year. You said RJ took a lot of necessary steps. Is he where you think he will be, or does he still have another couple steps to go to get to where we want him to be?
He made an incredible improvement with his shooting from outside. Huge strides, 32% up to about 38%. His free throw shooting was vastly improved. You know, people I think take for granted the fact that he always fills up a box score with assists and rebounds. He's so mature. He's always able to bounce back after a lackluster performance. And the reason why I'm so optimistic is because this is a guy that really devotes himself to his craft. He works at his game nonstop. And that's why I think he can take the next step. The one thing I would like to see him do is at times he forces it when he goes to the basket. At times he leaves his feet when he shouldn't and gets into a situation where he makes bad passes. So I think if he can correct those type of things, that will allow him to even improve further.
With Julius Randle, one most improved player, won over, I would say, basically every Knicks fan after last season's lackluster performance, we'll call it. Was these 5 games against Atlanta a sign of what's to come, or is that just first time in the playoffs? You know, this is the guy. Was it something like that?
I think Atlanta's a really good team. As you watch them, when we're taping this, it's after game one against Philly. I know Philly had a mad dash at the end to make it close, but Atlanta's a really good team. They did a great job of sloughing off, let's say, Capella off of Gibson and Noel to double Randle, and that caused all kinds of problems. When you look at the entire team, they didn't hit the threes that they did all year long. Randle was missing makeable shots. During the regular season, they finished fourth best in the league in three-point shooting. It was such an important part of the game. And for whatever reason, it's not just Randle. No one could hit a shot from the outside. So I think it has to do with playoff inexperience. And a lot of it has to do also with the fact that Atlanta played really good defense. I don't think this is something that's going to carry over at all.
For the upcoming 2021-2022 season, a lot of people said this playoffs exposed some obvious holes that the Knicks have. What would you like them to do the most?
Without question, without much thought, they need a starting point guard. They need a starting point guard that can distribute the ball. Rose seems at this point to be ideally suited coming off the bench. Quickly looks for his shot first. Elfrid Payton obviously is at a point where the coach doesn't want to play him at all. They need a starting point guard above and beyond and above all, and they need it yesterday.
Derrick Rose, too. I jokingly said, I hope the Knicks re-sign him to a max deal. That's obviously kind of bad for business, but do you want him back on this team next year?
Absolutely. They have a lot of decisions to make. You know, people don't talk about the fact that they got Reggie Bullock for $4 million and Nerlens Noel at $5 million, and Alec Burks at $6 million, and Derrick Rose with an expiring deal. I think he makes $8 million. It's incredible that those 4 players for their price combined, they're going to have to pay some of these guys a lot more to stay. They don't have bird rights on Noel or Burks. That means that they can't go over the cap to retain them. I don't know. I'd give Derrick Rose maybe $20 million over 2 years.
Derrick Rose, you could see when he came, when they made the trade on Super Bowl Sunday, this brought a presence that this team needed. Very similar to Taj Gibson, who didn't fill up the stat sheet, but when he was out there, you knew that Taj Gibson was on the court for the Knicks. So the two of them and having that connection with Thibs, I really, really liked, and I really want them to bring him back.
I agree. Gibson was great. Uh, People don't talk about it, and we really didn't talk about it maybe as much as we should. Mitch Robinson missed most of the year with the hand injury and then a foot injury. So even with Gibson playing and making the contribution that he made, I don't know that he would fit in next year other than being a bench player. But the point is that his presence is so important behind the scenes. And the same with Derrick Rose, because they're so familiar with a coach that can carry his message to the players. So I think you can get Gibson back for probably basically nothing. I don't know what they're going to do if they think that Mitch is going to be okay to go forward and Noel. I don't know if they can keep all three guys. It'll be very interesting to see. But I think Rose will definitely come back. They need Rose off the bench. He's ideally suited, as we've talked about, to be a spark off the bench.
With Mitch, there was the probable for him in game 2. Was that kind of just to get Atlanta scared a little bit, or was that he actually could have played this series?
I don't think that was a correct report. I don't think he was ready to go, because if that were the case, then you would have heard more lead up for games 3, 4, and 5. I don't. The Knicks never said anything about that. I don't know where that came from. I don't think he was ready to go.
So now with this new regime, it's very similar to the New York Jets. In one offseason, they clean house and bring in people that everybody wants, and the fans are like, "Oh wow, we like trust this team." This is the direction that the Knicks are going, right? We feel like they're making smart basketball choices, and the fans, it seems like for once they're not constantly shaking their head. They're buying in and going, "Okay, we can get behind this," and we know that this year shouldn't have gone as well as it did. So the fans, and I would say more so the front office, it seems like they're going in the correct direction, right?
I totally agree with that. They're getting great character players. I mentioned Burks. Who thought Burks was going to have the impact he had? Who thought Noel was going to have the impact he had? Who thought Emmanuel quickly at down in the 20s of the first round was going to have the impact he had? Who thought that Reggie Bullock under this coach was going to be so effective and not great against Atlanta, but overall really effective as a 3-and-D wing? I didn't think any of this was going to happen. Who thought that the acquisitions of Taj Gibson and Derrick Rose were going to be so important? You got to give the front office, the coaching staff, the whole organization credit for all of these acquisitions. And don't forget, Obi Toppin got a lot better as the season wore on.
That's a very good point, because Obi Toppin did struggle a lot in the shortened season, but in the playoffs, he played very meaningful basketball, which I think we said that the Julius Randle underperforming, not to be worried about. I think the Obi Toppin playing well in the playoffs is something that we will see. He did take a little step, and I think that he's going to build on that in the next season, and obviously being more comfortable and getting a full NBA summer under his belt.
You know, the fact is Randall was so good and led the league in minutes that curtailed Toppin's playing time and thus his development. I think the organization drafted Toppin with the thought that maybe he would replace Randall, and then Randall becomes this elite player. So I think they had to rethink this dynamic. The question going forward is, can you get Toppin enough playing time? And would they consider playing Randall and Toppin more together, which Tibbs never did? He always wanted Gibson or Noel or Mitch in there to protect the rim, as opposed to playing Randall at the 5.
I think that would be a very interesting small ball lineup going forward if you put Obi at 4 and Randall at 5, because, and then it just opens up the floor, because if Mitch is healthy, you know that he's no threat from 2 feet outside of the paint. So if they can widen the floor even the littlest bit and get it in spurts, I think that brings an aspect that this team didn't have really at all this year.
See, if you think back to the Hawks series, if you could have had a 5 to score, then Capella would have had to be more honest on D and not sloughed off the double Randall. So as good as Gibson and Noel are on the defensive end, and Mitch, they're obviously not the threats on offense that you might want. Although if Robinson were healthy, I think he would have been a better fit against Capella, and you would have had more ability to pick and roll on offense that could have helped things.
I could talk about the Knicks with you forever, but That's not doing everybody
Keep going.
justice.
Keep if you want. Keep fine.
I,
Keep whatever you got.
we could go for hours and hours, but there's a lot to cover with you specifically. Cornell grad, you've gone a bunch of different places, a lot of stops on the way. When did you know that sportscasting was going to be your future?
Well, I always wanted to pursue it. When I was at Cornell, I got on the radio. I got a lot of experience. I was very lucky that when I was in Ithaca, the city of Ithaca started a local news broadcast that I was a sportscaster on, believe it or not, with Carl Ravitch. We were the first two sportscasters on Ithaca Cable News back in the summer of 1986. And then I worked there during my senior year. So I had a TV tape to send out when I graduated. And I got my first job in Binghamton, New York, shortly after I graduated in the spring of 1987. From there, I went to Syracuse. From there, I went to Boston. In 93, I auditioned for a spot on Sports Center in February of 93. And believe it or not, Ravitch got the job. We lived together in Binghamton and worked together. He was the one that got hired. And then I got hired on ESPN2 in August of 93 for the launch of ESPN2. I was there until 2008 and have been at MSG since 2009. So long story short, I bounced around a little bit. I always wanted to do this. I put a lot of my guts into the pursuit of this, and thankfully it's worked out to this point. The time at MSG has just been phenomenal. I'm a native New Yorker. My first recollection of being a sports fan was watching the Knicks teams in the early 1970s. To be able to go to work and see Clyde Frazier, to work with Mike Breen, Sam Rosen, MSG, we are the network of Hall of Famers, and it's just an honor to be in the presence of these other great announcers.
If you had to tell a young kid in high school they want to pursue sportscasting, if they ever get down about, they make a bad call during a game or something, what do you tell them to bounce back from that and get better from it?
Well, this is a craft that takes repetition, and anybody out there who is young and aspiring to do this, I would advise them to get on the air as soon as possible, as often as possible. When they go to college, make sure they get the reps so that when they come out of college, they have a resume or a tape to mail out for a potential opportunity. I started in Binghamton, New York. That's a small market. And the beauty of that is that if you make some mistakes, you can get away with those mistakes, and mistakes that may not be tolerated at a higher level. So I'll tell you a short story here. There was Dan Rather was a CBS anchor at the time, Evening News. And if there was a CBS bulletin, our station's policy was that they would take Dan Rather live, even in the middle of our newscast. So in the middle of my sportscast one night, Steve, Dan Rather interrupted because he had a bulletin. And they came back to me and I said, before I was so rudely interrupted by Dan Rather. Not a good thing to say when what he had to talk about was a lot more important than what I had to talk about. Needless to say, if I had done that in a bigger market, I probably would have lost my job.
Speaking of bigger markets, you are one of the best MSG has to offer, and you spoke about your previous experience with ESPN. Talking about teams, is it different on a national network as opposed to a local marketed network?
Well, I actually like the local aspect better, maybe because I've always been, the Knicks have always been my team, my passion. When you're up in Bristol, as I was for all those years at ESPN, you're kind of detached and not as invested in the result. When you are around the Rangers and the Knicks as we are, you really root for them to do well. And it becomes a big deal to watch them. And I cannot tell you how nervous I was when the Knicks finished up the regular season against the Celtics. The Celtics were basically playing the JV. The Knicks needed the win to finish fourth overall in the East. If they lose, they finish sixth. We all know they needed fourth for home court. And that 17-point lead gets cut to 1 with a minute and a half. And I really almost had a nervous breakdown watching that game. You don't get that at ESPN in terms of you have too many other things to focus on. MSG, you're focused on the team that you care most about. And to me, that makes it more enjoyable in a lot of ways.
In your 13 years being very close to the Garden. Do you have a favorite memory since working for MSG?
Well, in terms of how we all came through as a group, it was in the unfortunate circumstance of Kobe Bryant's death last year. We happened to be on at 6 o'clock that night. It was a Sunday, which is earlier than normal. Get to work at like 3. Remember, Kobe Bryant's on the West Coast. So the news is starting to filter in about 3 o'clock Eastern time that he had this terrible outcome and died in the helicopter crash. So for us to put that together and present it in a good way, not a good way, but a buttoned up, professional, informative way, so shortly after finding out about that, was probably my highlight at MSG so far in terms of what I had to do and in terms of what the whole crew had to do. This past year, in terms of the team, was a highlight. Think about the surprise during the pandemic and all that we've had to do as a society. To me, this Knick team represents everything that's good. They don't take nights off. They play hard. They play defense. They bring everything that they have every night. So I would say Kobe Bryant situation and this past year, 2 highlights for me so far at MSG.
Second round of the playoffs are coming up. We did speak about how Atlanta should be taken seriously, and I very grossly underestimated them. Is there any other teams that you're looking to make a big splash in the rest of the playoffs?
Well, I think the West is going to be interesting with no Lakers. I think the Clippers look good to me. Kawhi Leonard, I tell you, I know he doesn't play every night. I know Paul George can go up and down. Boy, Kawhi Leonard in that Dallas series was absolutely phenomenal. I think Denver's going to start missing Jamal Murray. I always, for whatever reason, don't trust Utah. Maybe I should, but I don't. And Chris Paul is compromised still with Phoenix with that shoulder. So I think the Clippers are going to come out of the West. The East, I don't like the Nets, and I don't like the Nets because of the way that they went about putting their team together. Harden demanding his way out of Houston, Kyrie Irving demanding his way out of Boston. Kyrie Irving takes, every other night off during the regular season. Harden's now banged up. I don't root for the Nets, but I think that they have a really good shot, even without Harden, to come out of the East. So if you have the Nets and the Clippers in the finals, I think the Clippers could win that series. I hope that the Nets don't end up winning this championship.
And that brings up a really good point. Knicks run this city, correct?
It's interesting. The ratings would show even this year with the big 3, although they didn't play together a lot, the Knicks won the ratings head to head against the Nets.
And that's what it's good for me. I talk to people from all around the country, and they're talking about the Knicks for being relevant finally. And then they're like, yeah, but the Nets are way better. And it's like, yeah, but nobody. If the Nets were to win the championship, they would just go to the Yankee game instead. You know what I mean? They don't have that effect. They seem like an imported in team. I feel like they would get a lot more love nationally if they were still in New Jersey. They probably wouldn't have gotten, the big 3 that they have now. I don't think they had a real fan base there, but, they just put Barclays Center in and they're like, all right, we'll play basketball there too.
It's institutional for the market for the Knicks for whatever reason. And that if the Nets are not going to really, they have more traction, but they don't have more traction than the Knicks. With the Knicks winning with kind of a no-name roster against all the stars on the Nets, that just goes to show you where things are.
One of the final questions I want to ask you, and I really, really hope you have the answer. Why did they get rid of the Friday Night Knicks song?
I can't tell you. I maybe it's coming back. Maybe it was I think it could have been pandemic related. Did you like the Willie Randolph Friday Night Knicks?
It went okay. It's like, how do I put it? I asked somebody, oh wow, is Friday Night Knicks like a national thing? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I was like, they got this really great song, and I'm always excited. And then Mike Breen in the background, and Clyde Frazier talking over it, and then the highlight package. It's just one of the best things. And being a fan of this team, every night, every Friday night especially, you got to tune in to just hear that.
Well, maybe next year. I think it could have been pandemic related, but I don't have a firm answer for you.
It truly is like, you had to watch all of the games for a couple years in the past. Hearing that song made up for it a little bit.
Yeah, well, we won a lot of Emmys for our Friday Night Knicks. I'll tell you that.
Speaking of which, you do have your Emmy Award behind you. How did you go about winning the award?
I paid the Academy a ton of money. The 150 has won a couple, and we've won a couple from Knicks coverage over the years.
In the MSG 150, that is my first Bill Pidto memory. You during halftime of Knicks games going. It's incredible how much you covered in like 2.5 minutes. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but the amount of ground you cover in such a short period of time and how you still have breath after, it's incredible.
Well, thank you. It's something that they wanted to create something years ago to try to keep viewers at the half of the Knicks and in between periods of the Ranger games. Jeff Ostella is a producer I work with. He comes up with all the creative content, and we just have a lot of fun with it. It's Jeff and I have the same sensibility. I can't wait to come in to see what he's found on the internet or what kind of goofy clip he's put on the stuff. But we try to have fun with it, and it's been a lot of fun to do. That's for sure.
The last Nick question I want to ask you, and then I'm going to let you go. Favorite all-time New York Nick?
So I come of age, with the championship teams when I was a little boy, actually in Manhattan. We moved west when I was 7, but before that, those Knick teams were winning championships. And, to work with my favorite Knick is an incredible thrill, and that's Clyde Frazier. For guys that maybe are too young, and you might be, you have to understand that Clyde Frazier transcended just basketball fans back in that era. My mom, for example, loved Clyde Frazier. She used to say, Billy, I love Clyde Frazier because he doesn't ever break a sweat. He's so cool. I mean, they are transcendent above just the normal basketball fan. They captivated an entire city, and Clyde Frazier personified that, and he's my favorite Knick of all time. He's also a great guy, by the way. He's incredibly approachable. He's the most down-to-earth superstar you'd ever meet.
You ever ask him for fashion advice?
He's in a league of his own.
So between Coach Thibodeau, Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, all the players, they did an incredible job this season. But you, Wally, Allen, and Monica, when she would come in, you guys also a great part to the season. It made watching pre and post and halftime very enjoyable. So I just appreciate you as a fan, and the work that you guys definitely did not go unrecognized this season.
Well, hey, man, it's so nice of you to say, and it's really a pleasure and a joy to talk to you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Not a problem. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Once again, big thank you to Bill Pidto. He's going to finally get some well-deserved time off, but you will see him on the MSG Network very, very soon. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you on the next one.